Imagine being 12 years old and facing down a whole galaxy that wants you dead. That was Ulra Chen. She was standing in the middle of the council chambers of Nexara Prime, a place that had stood for 4,000 years. The dome above her was a half-mile of singing crystal, and 12,000 seats were filled with beings from over 300 different worlds. There were creatures with shimmering scales, others with wings of living stone, and some that were just clouds of colorful gas. And they were all there to watch a little girl from Earth be sentenced. This was a girl who had a tiny scar on her knee from a bike crash when she was 7. A girl whose mom used to braid her hair every single morning, who loved strawberry ice cream and stories about dragons. None of that meant a thing here. All they saw was a symbol. Cold, heavy chains were locked around her wrists. She stood on a platform of pure white stone, trying with all her might not to let them see her cry. Looking down on her was the High Arbiter, Vosketh, an ancient being who had ruled this council for 800 years. He was tall and skeletal, his body covered in gray, armor-like plates. His eyes were just endless black pools, and his voice boomed like a rock slide. "The human child is found guilty," Vosketh declared. "She will be the price for humanity's crimes against the Zithrani Empire." Up in the cheap seats, where the less important species sat, Ambassador David Chen clutched the railing so hard his knuckles went white. He was a small man in a wrinkled suit, his eyes red from 3 days of begging for his daughter's life. But no one had listened. "Please," David's voice cracked as he yelled across the massive chamber. "She's just a child. She doesn't know anything about a fugitive. She was just visiting me. Please, I'm begging you." But his pleas were met with laughter. A wave of cruel, alien chuckles rolled down from the upper tiers where the powerful species sat. The loudest came from the Zithroni delegation, beings who looked like they were carved from cracked red earth. Their ambassador, Krathx, a giant standing nearly 8 feet tall, rose to his feet. "The human colony on Vegas 7 is hiding a terrorist who murdered 14 of our soldiers," he bellowed. "We demanded you turn him over. You refused. Now you will see what refusal costs." "We don't have him!" David shouted back, his voice raw. "We've looked everywhere. The man you want isn't with us. You don't have a shred of proof." "Silence!" Vosketh's command cut through the noise like a whip. "The council has spoken. The sentence will be carried out in 30 minutes. It will be broadcast on every channel so the whole galaxy can see what happens to those who defy us." David lunged for the platform, but he didn't get more than a few feet before the guards grabbed him. They were Thornaki, massive, 6-legged insectoids who held him down easily as he struggled. "She's 12 years old!" David screamed, his voice breaking. "She's my daughter! She's just a little girl!" Vosketh simply tilted his ancient head, a gesture that was impossible to read. "Humans have been a part of this galactic community for 87 years, the High Arbiter said, his voice dripping with contempt. "And in all that time, you've proven to be weak, primitive, and utterly worthless. You have no real fleet, no power, and no friends willing to stand up for you. You exist because we allow it." He leaned forward, his black eyes seeming to drink the light from the room. "Perhaps today you will finally learn your place." The chamber exploded with cheers. All these different species who fought over everything else were united in this one thing, kicking the underdog. Down on the platform, Lara finally let a tear roll down her cheek. She thought of her mom back on Earth, who was probably watching this on the news, her heart breaking. She thought of her little brother, who was only 8 and wouldn't understand why his big sister was never coming home. She thought of all the birthdays she'd never have, all the books she'd never read. But she didn't beg. Her dad had taught her about dignity. He'd told her that being brave didn't mean you weren't scared. It meant you stood tall even when you were terrified. So Lara straightened her shoulders. She lifted her chin and stared right back at the High Arbiter. Her eyes were red from crying, but they were defiant. For just a second, a flicker of surprise crossed Vosketh's ancient face before he dismissed her and turned away. In the gallery, the guards had forced David to his knees. He'd stopped fighting. He was just a broken man, kneeling and weeping as he watched his daughter prepare to die. That's when a woman sat down beside him. She wore the same simple gray uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. She had short silver hair and a face etched with the lines of time. Her name tag read, Admiral Helena Vance, Earth Defense Coordination, a title everyone knew was just for show. Earth didn't have a real military, just a few old patrol ships for chasing pirates. Helena placed a gentle hand on David's shoulder. "Can you talk to her?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. David looked up, his eyes hollow. "What?" "Your daughter. Can you get a message to her?" "They gave me a communicator for a final goodbye," David whispered. "They thought it would make for good television." Helena gave a slow, deliberate nod. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, plain-looking data pad. But when she pressed her thumb to the screen, it lit up with a soft blue glow. "David," she said, her voice dropping lower, "listen to me. You need to call Laura. You need to tell her that help is on the way. Tell her to be brave and stay alive. Do you understand?" David let out a choked, bitter laugh. "Help? What help? We have nothing, Helena. You know that. Your whole job is to pretend we have a military that doesn't even exist." Helena just looked at him, her eyes steady. Then she leaned in close and whispered a few sentences into his ear. All the color drained from David's face. That's not possible," he stammered. "I need you to trust me," Helena said. "I need you to keep your daughter alive for 27 more minutes. Can you do that?" David stared at her, then, slowly, a flicker of impossible hope in his eyes, he nodded. Helena stood up and walked away, just another forgotten human official that no one bothered to watch. As she walked, she spoke softly into her blue device. "This is Vance. Authentication code, Whisper 77 Alpha. The protocol is active. I repeat, the protocol is active. They took one of our children. It's time." And across the galaxy, in 1,000 places no one knew existed, the lights came on. Deep in a secret base under the Pacific Ocean, a red alert flashed for the first time in 87 years. In the asteroid belt, ships disguised as simple mining vessels cracked open, revealing weapon systems that defied galactic law. Under the ice of Europa, engines that had been silent for decades ignited with a thunderous roar. And in a command center buried so deep it was closer to the Earth's core than its surface, a wall of screens came to life, each one showing a hidden piece of humanity's true power. A young officer stared at the displays, her eyes wide. "Ma'am," she said to the old man standing beside her, "we have confirmation from every sector. The entire network is online, all 12,000 ships." The old man nodded, his face a mask of grim resolve. 87 years, he said softly. 87 years of playing weak, of watching, waiting, and praying this day would never come. He looked at the main screen, at the image of the small girl in chains standing alone against a galaxy. "Send the word," he commanded. "All ships, all stations, we're done hiding. It's time for the galaxy to meet humanity." In the council chamber, David raised the communicator. He could hear his daughter's terrified breathing on the other end. "Laura, honey, listen," he said, the words Helena had given him, filling him with impossible strength. "Help is coming, real help. I just need you to be brave for a few more minutes. Can you do that for Daddy?" "Daddy?" Lara's voice was a tiny, frightened whisper. "What's happening?" "Something that should have happened a long time ago," David said, a strange smile touching his lips. "The galaxy is about to learn a lesson." And just then, high above the planet of Nexara Prime, space itself seemed to tear open. The first ship arrived. It didn't cruise into orbit, it simply appeared. It was bigger than anything the Council had ever seen, a vessel forged from midnight, like a piece of the night sky that had woken up and decided to hunt. And then a second ship blinked into existence, then a third, and a fourth. The sky itself began to darken under their growing shadow. Down in the council chamber, for the first time in 800 years, High Arbiter Vasquez felt a sensation he thought was long dead. Fear. It was being caused by a species humanity had only met 5 years ago, now asking to learn the single most important lesson humans had ever taught themselves. "That is why we came," she said softly. "That is the entire reason we are here." She rose and took the girl by the hand. The two of them walked together through the memorial garden, past the engraved stones of heroes who sacrificed everything for this very moment, and toward a school where students from a dozen different species were learning the history of a galaxy that was finally, truly beginning to change. Behind them, the red desert of Mars stretched out to an edge that no longer felt like a threat. Overhead, the stars sparkled in a sky that once seemed filled with enemies, but now glimmered with endless possibility. Humanity had stared into the void between worlds and imagined monsters. So they made themselves strong enough to fight any monster they might find. And when the moment of truth arrived, they showed everyone that real strength was having the courage to offer mercy instead of anger. It wasn't the conclusion anyone saw coming. It was something far better. The stars looked on in silence as the galaxy took its first breath of healing. The ship just hung there in the sky over Nixara Prime, like a moon that had decided to pay a visit. Its body was perfectly smooth and black, seeming to swallow the light from the system's star and give nothing back. In the council chamber, not a single person could tear their eyes from the viewing screens. And then the second ship appeared. It solidified right next to the first one, a perfect twin in size and design. The very fabric of space seemed to ripple around it, and then it was just there, solid and real, as if it had been there all along. A third ship joined them, then a fourth and a fifth. High Arbiter Vasquez's hands clenched the arms of his chair. His claws, which hadn't been seen in combat for 300 years, slid out on their own. "What is the meaning of this?" he roared. "Where are they coming from?" His advisors were a blur of motion at their consoles, their screens flashing with data that was completely nonsensical. Every single sensor on Nexora Prime was screaming alerts. We don't know," one of them managed to say. "The energy readings, they're originating from human space, but we have never seen anything like this. The data suggests their technology is at least 500 years ahead of the current galactic standard." "That's ridiculous," Kvex of the Zithrani Empire spat. "The humans have nothing. We've watched them for decades. They have cargo haulers, passenger ships, and a few little patrol boats. That's it." "With all due respect, Ambassador," the advisor said, his voice trembling, "what we thought we knew and what we are currently seeing are two very different things." The sky kept filling up. 10 ships, then 20, then 50, then 100. They just kept coming, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in flawless formation. Every last one of them was a warship, the likes of which the galaxy had never witnessed. Every last one was proof that the Council's entire understanding of humanity was a lie. Up in the minor species gallery, David Chen stared at the screens, tears still glistening on his face, but the hopelessness in his eyes was vanishing, replaced by something that looked a lot like hope. Right beside him, Admiral Helena Vance spoke into her communicator, her voice perfectly calm. "All units, hold your formation. Do not engage unless you are engaged first. This is a rescue mission, not an invasion. We are here for one little girl. Everyone else gets to go home unharmed, as long as they let us." The council chamber had gone completely still. 12,000 representatives from 300 species could only stare at the screens, watching their entire perception of the universe crumble before their eyes. Ambassador Krax was the first to shake off the shock. He slammed a fist on his chair. "This means nothing," he yelled. "These ships came from nowhere. We don't even know if they're real. They could be holograms, a desperate bluff from a dying species. The Council's decision stands. The execution will proceed." He glared at his military attaché. "Signal our fleet. Order them to intercept these human ships." The attaché froze, his face turning ghost white. "Ambassador, the Zithroni fleet in this system is made up of 47 warships. The human ships now total over 300, and more are arriving by the second." Additionally what? "Additionally, sir, our ships aren't answering. All contact with the fleet is gone, and we're getting reports that it's the same for every military ship in the system, no matter which species they belong to." All across the galaxy, the same scene was unfolding. In the Thornaki home system, admirals were shouting orders that their crews would never receive. At Vorith Military Command, techs frantically tried to reboot connections that had simply vanished. In every last corner of the Conquered, every war fleet, every defense platform, every single armed vessel was suddenly deaf and blind, cut off from its command. The humans had achieved the impossible. They had silenced the galaxy's entire military without firing a single shot. And still, more ships poured in. 500, then 1,000, then 2,000. They saturated the space around Nexar Prime, creating a second sky, one that was darker than any night and infinitely more terrifying. The planet's defense platforms, the crown jewel of Concordance engineering, just floated among them like bath toys in an ocean. Helena Vance gave a slight nod. "Put me on the main broadcast channel," she ordered. "I think it's time we introduced ourselves." Every screen in the council chamber flickered at once. The image of the massive fleet was suddenly replaced by a single face. By Galactic standards, Admiral Helena Vance was not an intimidating figure. She was small, old, and looked utterly ordinary. She wore a plain uniform with no medals, just a simple patch on her shoulder showing a blue circle with a white star inside. But when she began to speak, her voice was filled with the crushing weight of 87 years of waiting. "This is Admiral Helena Vance of the United Earth Defense Force," she said. "I'm speaking to the Galactic Council and to all species currently tuned into this broadcast." She let the silence hang for a moment, her calm, gray eyes seeming to make contact with every single person watching. 23 minutes ago, your council condemned a 12-year-old human child to death. Her name is Ulra Chen. Her only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time while your politicians played their power games. You mistook her for a symbol of our weakness and decided that executing a child was a good way to show off your strength. Helena's voice never wavered. She didn't have to raise it. "You were mistaken about our weakness, and you were mistaken about a great many other things. For 87 years, humanity has kept its true nature hidden. We observed. We waited. We held on to the hope that the galaxy would prove itself to be something worth being a part of. Instead, you taught us exactly what we needed to be ready for." She leaned in just a little. "Behind me are 12,000 warships. Any single one of them is more powerful than anything your combined fleets could ever hope to build. Each one of them represents a decision humanity made a long, long time ago. We decided we would never again be at the mercy of those who think kindness is the same as weakness." High Arbiter Vosketh finally found his voice. "You dare to threaten this council," he snarled at the screen. "You dare to bring weapons of war to the very heart of galactic civilization?" "I dare nothing," Helena answered, her tone still perfectly level. "I'm merely showing you the reality of the situation. A reality that has existed for 87 years while you dismissed us as insignificant. A reality that will continue to exist long after today is over." She glanced at something just out of view. "You have 17 minutes left before our original deadline expires. In that time, you will release Laura Chen completely unharmed. You will hand over every individual responsible for her arrest and her sentencing. And you will issue a formal apology to the human race for this act of barbarism." "And what if we say no?" Krath shot back. Helena turned her gaze to him. For just a second, a flicker of something that looked like pity crossed her face. "Ambassador Kraths," she said, "right now, a human fleet 3 times larger than this one is in position directly above the Zithrani homeworld. Similar fleets are holding position above the homeworld of every species represented on this council. We have not fired a single weapon. We have not harmed a single soul. But if that little girl dies, I need you to understand something with perfect clarity." She paused for effect. "We remember who we were. We remember the terrible wars we fought against each other. We remember raining fire down on our own cities. We remember the millions we killed with weapons that should never have been created. We dragged ourselves out of that darkness and swore we would never allow ourselves to become monsters again." Her voice grew hard as steel. "But you should make no mistake. If you harm our child, we will show you exactly what real monsters look like. Not because we want to, but because you will have given us no other choice. The broadcast cut out. The screen switched back to the silent, menacing fleet. The council chamber exploded into pure chaos. Representatives were on their feet, screaming at one another. Some were demanding an immediate suicidal attack. Others were pleading for negotiations. A few species quietly began sending messages of unconditional surrender, unwilling to gamble their entire existence on the pride of their neighbors. High Arbiter Voskith just sat on his throne, frozen. His black eyes stared into space. 800 years. He had been in power for 800 years. He had put down rebellions, absorbed entire empires, and bent the will of the galaxy to his own. Not once in all that time had he ever felt like this. The humans. They were supposed to be nothing, a forgotten footnote in the galactic history books, and they were hiding this. On the execution platform, Lara Chen watched the pandemonium with wide, unbelieving eyes. The guards who had been setting up the execution device had stopped cold. They were just standing there, looking from the screens to each other, and then up to the sky that was now completely blotted out by human warships. One of them, a young Thornaki who was clearly fresh out of training, walked carefully toward her. "Human child," he said, his voice shaky. "Your people, they made all of this in secret?" Lara just nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. The guard looked back at the screens, then down at the little girl in chains. You could see something shift in his stance. "I have a daughter," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She's about your age. If someone ever took her, if someone ever threatened to—" He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. He didn't have to say a word. The guard knelt, his chitinous body clicking, and unlocked the heavy chains on Ulra's wrists. They hit the floor with a deafening clang. "Go," he grunted. "Find your dad. I'll tell them you got away." "But you'll get in so much trouble," Lara whispered, her voice trembling. The guard just shrugged, a weirdly human gesture for his insect-like frame. "Maybe," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "But I want to go home tonight and be able to look my own daughter in the eye. I want to tell her that when it counted, her dad did the right thing." Lara paused for only a heartbeat. Then she bolted. She weaved through the pandemonium on the council floor, dodging shouting politicians and officials running in circles, racing toward the gallery for minor species, toward the sound of her father desperately calling her name. She ran while the entire galaxy watched from a sky teeming with warships, as every preconceived notion about humanity evaporated like mist in the sun. And on the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Helena Vance saw a single tiny blip moving fast through the council building's schematics. A small, tight smile formed on her lips. "The package is on the move," she reported calmly. "Ground team, get ready for extraction. We're taking our girl home." 16 minutes were left on the clock. An entire galaxy held its breath. Alara sprinted down hallways that felt like they stretched into infinity. The council building, a labyrinth of shimmering crystal and cold stone, was built for giants, and she had never felt so impossibly small. Her legs were on fire, her lungs screamed for air, but she just kept running because she knew her father was up ahead, and she could still hear him calling for her. The chaos behind her was getting louder, a symphony of destruction. Representatives were screaming at each other in a dozen languages she didn't know. Guards sprinted right past her, their eyes fixed on the bigger crisis, never even noticing a little human girl running against the tide. "Laura, over here!" She whipped around a corner, and there he was. David Chen stood at the entrance to the gallery, his arms stretched out for her. She crashed right into his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding on so tight she could hardly get a breath. "I've got you," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "I've got you. It's over. You're safe now." Lara buried her face into her dad's shirt, and finally let the tears come. All the terror, the confusion, and the crushing loneliness from the last 3 days came pouring out of her in a flood. Her tiny frame was racked with sobs. David just held her through all of it. Admiral Helena Vance approached them without a sound. She knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with Ulra. "Hello, Ulra," she said, her voice gentle. "My name is Helena." I'm going to take you home. Laura looked up, her eyes puffy and red. You brought all these ships just for me? Helena's smile was sad, the kind you see on someone who has seen too much of the universe. We would have brought twice as many, she said softly. You're one of ours, nothing else matters. But how? They all said we didn't have a military. They were all wrong, Helena stated simply. That was the whole point. She stood up and touched a device in her ear, listening to a voice no one else could hear. Ground team is in position, she announced. We're pulling you out now. The council can clean up its own mess. A strange shimmer started to form in the air next to them. The light warped and twisted on itself, and then a soldier stepped through as if from another dimension. There was no mistaking what he was. His armor seemed to swallow the light, made of shifting plates that rearranged themselves with his every move. His helmet was perfectly smooth, except for a single glowing blue visor. He moved with the grace of flowing water or rising smoke, like something that had forgotten the rules of being solid. Ambassador Chen, Miss Chen, the soldier said, his voice perfectly calm and professional. I'm Sergeant Torres. Please stick close to me. It's time to go. Laura couldn't help but stare. How did you just show up like that? That's a trade secret, Torres replied, and she could practically hear the smile in his voice. Ready to go home? Laura nodded, speechless. Torres reached out, placing a hand on David's shoulder and the other on Maria's. The shimmering distortion enveloped them, and the world dissolved into a blinding white light. When it all came back into focus, they were standing in a room that hummed with quiet, immense power. Consoles lined every wall, their screens displaying star charts and views of deep space. Crew members in dark, crisp uniforms moved about with focused efficiency. They were on one of the human ships. A massive viewport dominated the far wall, and through it, Laura could see the planet Insara Prime floating silently below. From way up here, it looked beautiful and harmless, a stark contrast to the terrifying place where she had just been minutes from death. Welcome aboard the UES Remembrance, Torres said. We'll have you back on Earth in about 6 hours. You can find food and water in the next room, and we have a medical team on standby if you need them. David's knees finally buckled. He sank to the floor, still clutching Laura's hand tightly. He looked up at Torres, his face a mixture of pure gratitude, disbelief, and something bordering on awe. I never knew, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I've been a diplomat for 15 years. I had no idea any of this even existed. That was the idea, sir, Torres replied. The less people knew, the safer the secret. But why? Why go to all this trouble to hide it? It was Helena's voice that answered, piped in through the room's speakers from the command center. Because we needed to understand the kind of galaxy we were really joining, she explained. 87 years ago, during first contact, we saw how the powerful treated the powerless. We saw entire species put in chains. We saw planets stripped of their resources. We saw civilizations wiped out just because they had something someone else wanted. A nearby screen flickered to life, showing grainy historical footage, alien ships landing on Earth for the first time, nervous human leaders shaking hands with strange ambassadors, the sheer wonder and terror of that moment. We could have shown our hand back then, Helena's voice continued. Even then, our technology was decades more advanced than anything the Conquered had. We could have used our strength to demand their respect, but instead, we chose to be quiet, to watch, to learn, and to figure out exactly who we were dealing with. The footage on the screen shifted. It now showed colossal shipyards being constructed in the dark, hidden corners of the solar system. Weapons tests lighting up empty asteroid fields. Soldiers training in secret facilities buried deep beneath the oceans and carved out of mountains. We built our strength in the shadows, Helena said. Every freighter we launched was designed to be converted into a warship. Every colony ship had weapons hidden deep in its hull. Every research outpost was secretly a military base. The galaxy looked at us and saw a harmless, primitive race, and we let them. But why wait all this time? David asked. If you had this kind of power, why not step in sooner? Helena was silent for a moment. Because power without wisdom is just a path to destruction, she said at last. We know that better than anyone, Ambassador. We were monsters once. We scorched our own planet with weapons that could crack continents. Millions of our own people died in pointless wars. We dragged ourselves out of that darkness, and we swore on the graves of our ancestors that we would never, ever become those creatures again. The display showed new, haunting images from Earth's past, cities engulfed in fire, mushroom clouds blooming against a sick gray sky, mass graves that stretched all the way to the horizon. We built this entire fleet with the desperate hope that we would never have to use it, Helena said. We wanted to believe the galaxy could be better, that if we offered kindness, we would get kindness in return. For 87 years, we kept that hope alive. The historical images faded away, replaced by the live view from outside the ship. 12,000 warships hanging in perfect silent formation around a terrified planet. Today, that hope died. They took one of our children and they sentenced her to death to make a political point. They looked at our kindness and they called it weakness. They saw our patience and they called it an invitation to be bullied. Helena's voice turned as hard as steel. So now they will see what we really are. Not because we want this fight, but because they gave us no other choice. Down in the council chamber, the chaos had frozen into a state of stunned paralysis. High Arbiter Vasquez was motionless on his throne. His advisors were babbling around him, but he couldn't hear a single word. His mind was stuck, replaying the same terrifying thought again and again. 87 years. For 87 years, they had hidden all of this. He had been the ruler of the council for 800 years. He thought he knew what power was. He thought he understood what strength looked like. The Vornath had conquered 100 planets and built an empire that spanned a quarter of the galaxy. And the whole time, the humans were just watching, waiting, and building a force that made all the Vornath's accomplishments look like toddlers playing with blocks. High Arbiter, one of his advisors cautiously approached. The human fleet is hailing us. They wish to discuss terms. Terms? The word tasted like poison in his mouth. The council didn't discuss terms. The council gave them. What terms? Vasquez forced himself to ask. What do they want? The advisor glanced down at his datapad, his eyes wide with disbelief. They want everyone responsible for ordering the execution to surrender themselves for trial. They want a public, formal apology broadcast on all galactic channels. And he trailed off, unable to continue. And what else? What else do they want? That's it. They want nothing else. No planets, no resources, no trade deals. Just accountability for what they did to the child. Vasquez just stared at him. That is all? That is all. Ambassador Krath shoved his way through the terrified crowd, his red, ridged face contorted in a mask of fury. This is an outrage, he bellowed. We do not bow to threats. We do not apologize to lesser beings. The Zithrani Empire has stared down far worse than this. Have you really? A new voice cut in. Every head in the chamber snapped toward the main view screen. It had activated on its own, showing the face of Admiral Vance, her gray eyes as cold and unforgiving as deep space. Your homeworld is currently surrounded by 37,000 of our warships, she stated, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. Your entire fleet has been neutralized. Your planetary defense systems are offline. In the time it has taken me to say this sentence, we could have turned your capital city to radioactive glass. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing. Ambassador Kraths, I need you to understand something very clearly. I don't make threats. I have no time for posturing or political games. I am simply telling you the facts of your situation and what will happen if you fail to comply with our requests. And if we fight back? Kraths spat. Helena's expression did not flicker. Then you die, she said. All of you. Your entire species will be erased. Once it's done, we'll rebuild, and in 100 years, no one will even remember the Zithrani ever existed. She let the weight of that threat hang in the air. Or, she went on, you can give us justice for what you tried to do to our child. You can admit that what happened here was wrong, and you can leave with your worlds intact and a lesson learned. The view screen then flickered, showing a new scene from inside the human ship. There sat Ambassador David Chen, with his daughter curled up against him, her head resting on his shoulder. She was fast asleep, completely worn out by fear and then relief. David gently stroked her hair, his own eyes glistening with tears. "This is what you were trying to wipe out," Helena said, her voice low. "A father and his little girl. A family. This is what you decided was acceptable collateral damage in your power games." The image stayed on screen for a long, quiet moment. "You have 9 minutes left," Helena stated. "I suggest you use them well." The screen went black. In the heavy silence that followed, High Arbiter Vasquez made a choice that would ripple through the galaxy for generations. He stood up from his massive throne. "Clear the chamber," he ordered softly. "All representatives, back to your delegations. This emergency session is over." "But High Arbiter," Krathvax started to object. "The decision has been made," Vasquez cut him off, turning to face the Zithrani ambassador. "You may have lit the fuse," he said, "but I let it burn. I wanted to make an example out of the humans. I wanted to prove to the entire galaxy that the Council's authority was absolute. I was actually willing to sacrifice a child just to make a point." He looked down at his own hands, shocked to see them trembling. "I was wrong. And now, we all have to pay for my arrogance." He started walking toward the main communications console, each step feeling slow and heavy, like the pull of gravity had intensified just for him. "Open a channel to the human fleet," he commanded. "Let them know we accept their terms, every single one." "High Arbiter, you can't." "I can," Vasquez replied, turning back to Crafts. "And I will. We learned a vital lesson today, Ambassador. We learned that the universe is far bigger and far more dangerous than we ever let ourselves believe. We learned that the power we thought we had was just an illusion. And we learned that compassion is not a weakness." He glanced up at the ceiling, as if he could see right through it to the armada waiting in orbit. "For 87 years, the humans chose peace. They could have shattered our civilization at any point, but they didn't. They waited, hoping we would grow into something better than what we are." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Today, we showed them exactly who we are. I have a feeling we're going to regret it for the rest of our lives." The channel opened, and the galaxy watched as the High Arbiter of the Galactic Council surrendered to a species they had dismissed as insignificant. The surrender was beamed to every corner of the galaxy. Billions of beings saw High Arbiter Vasquez bow his ancient head and speak words no council leader had ever uttered. He admitted their mistake. He took full responsibility. He handed over everyone who ordered the execution, himself included, to face human justice. When he finished, a profound silence fell over 100,000 worlds. Aboard the UES Remembrance, Lyra Chen was awake. She was sitting with her dad in a small observation lounge, gazing out a window as the human fleet started to shift and reorganize. The ships that had blanketed the sky were now moving into orderly new formations, opening up lanes for traffic and setting up defensive perimeters around the planet below. Admiral Helena Vance walked into the room. She looked exhausted, with new lines etched around her eyes that hadn't been there in the morning. "It's over," she said softly. "The Council has surrendered. The people responsible are being taken to a secure facility to stand trial. The crisis has passed." David looked up at her. "Has it? We just showed our hand to the entire galaxy. Nothing will ever be the same." "Things were never going to stay the same," Helena replied. "Today just determined how they would change." She sat down in a chair across from them. "May I have a word with your daughter?" David paused for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Helena turned her attention to Lyra. The girl looked so tiny, so young. It was almost impossible to grasp that she had been at the heart of an event that would reshape the course of galactic history. "Lyra," Helena began gently, "what they did to you today was terribly wrong. It never should have happened. I need you to know that." Lyra nodded slowly. "Why did they hate us so much?" she asked. It was such a simple question with an impossibly complicated answer. Helena chose her words with care. They didn't hate us, she explained. They didn't even think about us. In their eyes, we were small and insignificant. Or at least, that's what they thought. We weren't real to them. We were just pawns in their game, pieces to be used and then thrown away. They couldn't hate us because they never even saw us as people worthy of hate. That's even worse, Lyra said in a small voice. Yes, Helena agreed. It is. The girl was quiet for a bit. Then she asked another question. What comes next? Are we going to be like them now? Helena blinked, taken aback. What do you mean by that? You have all of these ships, all this incredible power. You could force them to do anything you want. You could just take over everything. Lyra's eyes were serious, far too serious for a girl her age. Are we going to be the ones who hurt people now? The ones who don't see other people as real? David started to reach for his daughter's hand, but Helena lifted a finger, signaling him to wait. That, she said, her voice measured, is the single most important question anyone has asked today. And it's the very question we've been asking ourselves for 87 years. She touched a nearby panel, and a holographic display flickered to life, showing scenes from humanity's past. This is who we used to be, Helena said. The images were difficult to watch. Cities in flames, bodies lying in the streets, weapons capable of ending worlds being designed and used. The darkest chapters of human history were preserved in horrifying detail. We did this to our own kind, Helena went on. For thousands of years, we just kept finding newer, more efficient ways to harm one another. We built empires on top of bones. We burned down libraries and wiped out entire cultures. We came so close to destroying our own species that some days it feels like a miracle we even survived. The images shifted. Now they showed something entirely different. People rebuilding, hands reaching out across old enemy lines, former foes sitting at a table together to write new laws. But we learned, Helena said. Slowly and with great pain, we learned that strength without compassion is just brutality. We learned that power without wisdom is nothing but destruction. We learned that you don't measure a civilization by how it treats its strongest, but by how it treats its most vulnerable. She looked at Lyra, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. When we first encountered the galaxy, we had a choice. We could have shown them our full strength. We could have used fear to demand their respect. Instead, we chose to hide, to observe, and to wait, because we needed to know if the galaxy was worth being a part of. We wanted to believe that we weren't the only ones who had learned these hard lessons. And were they, Lyra asked, worth joining? Helena's face grew somber. Some of them are, she said. There are good species out there, kind ones, who help their neighbors and stand up for the weak. But they aren't the ones running things. The ones in charge are the ones who saw a little girl in chains and called it acceptable politics. The hologram changed one last time, now displaying the human fleet, a vast and silent force against the backdrop of stars. So now we face another choice. It's the same one we've had all along. We can use this power to become conquerors. We can become the new masters of the galaxy and do to them exactly what they would have done to us. We can make them live in fear for the rest of time. She let that sink in. Or we can show them a better way. Lyra frowned. What other way is there? We can be the people we wish they had been for us. We can protect the weak and ask for nothing in return. We can choose mercy over revenge. We can build something new, something better, and then invite them to help us build it. But they tried to kill me, Lyra said, her voice trembling. They were going to murder me and then laugh about it. Yes, they were, Helena said, not flinching from the girl's pain. And if we murder them in return, then absolutely nothing changes. The galaxy just stays the way it has always been. The powerful crush the weak, everyone lives in fear, and eventually someone else builds an even bigger fleet, and the whole ugly cycle just starts over again. She reached across and gently took Lyra's hand. But if we choose to be different, if we show them there's another way to have power, then maybe Just maybe we can change things for good. Maybe we can be the ones to finally break the cycle. Maybe we can create a galaxy where no child, human or not, ever has to stand in chains, waiting to die because of someone else's politics. Lyra was quiet for a very long time. She looked at the hologram of the fleet. She looked at her father, who was watching her with a mixture of love and deep concern. Then she looked at Admiral Vance, this old woman who held the power to extinguish civilizations in her hands. "My grandmother used to tell me stories," Lyra said at last, "about the bad old days on Earth, all the wars and famines and the awful things people did to each other. She told me that the hardest part of getting better wasn't about winning the fights, it was about learning how to stop fighting in the first place." "Your grandmother sounds like a very wise woman," Helena said softly. "She said that anyone can destroy things. Breaking stuff is easy, but building something that lasts, something truly good, something worth protecting, that's the hard part. That takes real strength." Lyra squeezed Helena's hand. "I think she was right," the little girl said. "I think we should try to build something, even if they don't deserve our help, even after they were going to kill me, because if we don't, then what's the point of having all this power anyway?" A genuine smile spread across Helena's face, one filled with warmth and pride. "You know," she said, "I have spent my entire life preparing for this very moment. Decades of planning, building, and worrying about what we would do when this day finally came. They sentenced a 12-year-old girl to death over a broken teacup. That's not a joke. They called it a diplomatic incident, a symbol of humanity's carelessness. But really, it was an excuse. They saw a little girl, my daughter, and decided she was the perfect tool to put our entire species back in its place. They never counted on us pushing back. They never imagined what real power looked like. If you think you know how this story ends, you don't. Stick with me for a minute, and I'll tell you how a little girl who loved stargazing brought an ancient galactic empire to its knees. 12-year-old Lara Chen believed in three things: the kindness of strangers, the stories her dad told about her mom, and the absolute perfection of a star chart map. Her dad, David, was a low-level diplomat on Xylar, a sterile, boring space station that served as a waiting room for the real galaxy. It was a place of polished chrome and polite, empty smiles. Lara's only real friend was a worn-out stuffed bear named Captain Cuddles, a final gift from her mom, a brilliant xenobotanist who had passed away 2 years prior. "Your mom," David would say, his voice thick with memory, "she could find the good in a black hole." The incident happened in the grand reception hall. Lara, sketching a new constellation in her notebook, accidentally bumped into a floating service droid. A ceremonial teacup belonging to the imperious High Arbiter Voskath wobbled and then shattered on the floor. It was a priceless antique, a relic from a forgotten age. Voskath's eyes, cold and reptilian, locked onto Lara. He didn't see a child. He saw an opportunity. Within the hour, armored guards stormed their small apartment. They accused Lara of espionage, claiming she'd intentionally created a diversion. David watched in horror, completely powerless, as they put his daughter in chains. David spent the next 3 days in a living nightmare. He pleaded with the human embassy. They told him to be patient. He begged the ambassadors of other species, aliens his wife had once called friends. They offered condolences but refused to interfere. The Galactic Council was absolute, and no one dared to challenge it for the sake of one primitive human girl. A terrible realization sunk in. They were completely alone. The galaxy wasn't just indifferent, it was hostile. His daughter was going to die, and the universe would simply watch. Lara sat in a cold, sterile cell. They had taken Captain Cuddles, calling it potential contraband. For the first time, she felt truly scared, but her mom's voice echoed in her head. "Find the good, Lara." She noticed one of the guards, a young insectoid creature named Crix, seemed nervous. He never met her eyes. One day, when no one was looking, he slipped a small, sweet-smelling fruit through the energy bars of her cell. It was a tiny act of rebellion, a flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness, and it gave Lara a sliver of hope. Then, the galaxy changed. Without warning, the skies above the Council's capital, Nexar Prime, went dark. It wasn't an attack, it was an arrival. Thousands of human warships, a fleet larger than anyone thought humanity possessed, blinked into existence. They didn't fire. They didn't issue threats. They just sat there, a silent, terrifying testament to a species that had been pushed too far. On every galactic channel, a single message appeared: "Give us back our daughter." The galaxy held its breath, stunned. They had mistaken humanity's patience for weakness. They were about to learn how wrong they were. High Arbiter Voskath was enraged. This defiance was unthinkable. He decided to call their bluff. He announced a public execution to be broadcast live across the galaxy. He would make an example of the girl and force the human fleet to either retreat in shame or fire the first shot, branding themselves as savages. He dragged Lara to a platform in the center of the council chamber, the cameras of the entire galaxy watching her every move. David watched on a monitor, his heart shattering into a million pieces. Just then, a coded message reached David's datapad from an old contact of his wife's. It contained a hidden file. He opened it, and his blood ran cold. This was never about a teacup. His wife, before her death, had discovered Voskath was secretly hoarding resources from dying worlds, enriching himself while entire species went extinct. Lara's arrest was a message to David, a warning to stay silent about a secret he didn't even know he possessed. They weren't just killing his daughter. They were trying to bury his wife's legacy. In the council chamber, the guard Crix created a momentary power surge, causing a distraction. In that brief window of chaos, he secretly patched Lara's comm signal into the main broadcast feed. He leaned in close and whispered, "The galaxy is listening. Tell them your truth." Lara looked at the towering figure of Voskath, then at the camera lens that represented billions of watching eyes. She took a deep breath, not to plead for her life, but to deliver a message her mother would have been proud of. "My name is Lara Chen," she said, her voice small but steady, echoing across the silent galaxy. "The man who is about to kill me, I forgive him." A wave of shock rippled through the viewers. "My mom taught me that hurting people only creates more hurt. She said real strength is choosing kindness when it's the hardest thing to do." She looked directly at Voskath. "You are powerful, but you could be so much more. You could be good." The simple, profound words of a child cut through centuries of political maneuvering and cynical power plays. At that exact moment, David hit send. His wife's evidence, the data logs, the secret accounts, the star charts of plundered worlds, flooded the galactic network. The truth was out. The foundation of the Council's authority, built on a lie of benevolent leadership, cracked and then crumbled into dust. The species Voskath had oppressed for centuries saw him for what he was, a thief and a tyrant, exposed by the child he tried to murder. The fallout was immediate. The council guard turned on their leaders. Voskath was arrested, his face a mask of disbelief. But when the dust settled, humanity faced a choice. With their fleet holding the galaxy hostage, they could have taken revenge. They could have become the new tyrants. Instead, they did something no one expected. They offered justice, not vengeance. They proposed a new council, one where every species had an equal voice, and where the powerful were held accountable. David held Lara in his arms. Back in the safety of the human flagship, Captain Cuddles tucked safely beside her. "I was so angry," David whispered, his voice trembling. "I wanted to burn their whole world down for what they did to you." Lara looked up at him. "But you didn't," she said softly. "That's why we won." They had shown the galaxy that true strength wasn't about the power to destroy worlds, but the courage to protect one small girl. 1 year later, Lara, now 13, stood in the center of a new circular chamber where no one sat higher than anyone else. She addressed the new Galactic Compact. "A year ago," she said, her voice clear and strong, "they were wrong about many things, but the biggest thing they were wrong about wasn't our strength. It was what we chose to do with it." She announced the Compact of Protected Peoples, a promise that humanity would shield anyone facing oppression, asking for nothing in return. This was their new purpose, not to rule, but to serve, not to conquer, but to protect. And in a nearby rehabilitation facility, the former High Arbiter Voskath watched, learning a long, slow lesson about mercy. The choice is always in your hands. It always was. She stepped away from the middle of the circle. 27 minutes, she said, her voice low. That's how long it took for the entire universe to change. But real change isn't a single moment. It's something we build, day by day, with every choice we make, every time we offer a hand, and every chance we give to the people who hurt us. Her voice grew stronger. The galaxy started turning 1 year ago, but it's still turning, and the direction it goes now is up to every single one of us, together. She walked over to the human delegation and sat down beside her father. David wrapped his arm around her, pulling her into a tight hug. The applause began as a trickle, just a few representatives here and there. But then it grew, until the entire chamber, filled with species that had been mortal enemies for thousands of years, was on its feet, celebrating something new, something precious, something that needed to be protected. High Arbiter Voskath remained seated, but as he watched Laura Chen, his ancient eyes held a look that might have been respect. Or maybe, just maybe, it was hope. Far outside the station, the human fleet floated in the blackness of space. 12,000 ships, still on high alert, still watching. But their weapons were powered down. Their job had changed. They weren't there for war anymore. They were guardians. And in classrooms across 100,000 different worlds, children were learning a new history. It was the story of a little girl who was condemned to die and the entire species that showed up to save her. It was the story of a choice made in the darkest of times, a choice to be better than the ones who wanted to see them burn. It was the story of how the galaxy was changed, not by fire and fury, but by a simple act of mercy. A year later, Laura Chen went back to Nexara Prime. She walked through the same council chamber where she had once been dragged in chains. She stood on the very platform where she had prepared to meet her end. A memorial now stood in that spot, not for her, but for all the souls who had suffered under the iron fist of the old council. Their names were carved into the stone, an endless list that served as a quiet reminder of what happened and what must never happen again. Lara gently placed her hand on the cold stone. "I forgive you," she whispered, "all of you. Not because you earned it, but because I deserve to be free from all this anger. Because holding on to hate was a poison that would only destroy me. Because my grandmother always told me that the greatest show of strength is learning to let go." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the past behind her. The galaxy had turned, and it would never be the same again.